Hey guys, welcome to the Babbling Pastor Podcast with Michael.
And you were an archangel. I never put that together.
That's why my mother named me what I was. It's like I came out of the womb and she's like, that kid looks like an angel.
Mm-hmm. My little angel.
Well, no, not like a cute little angel, but like buff
angel. Right. Yeah, of course. An archangel, right? Like the X-Men.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, actually, the story goes that I was, they thought I was like a little small primate because I was so hairy, and I don't know the rest of the story other than it was just like, it wasn't a beautiful moment, I guess. Anyway, hey, enough about my birth. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today, we are going to be discussing, actually this whole month probably, some of these topics are going to get some people riled up, but we kind of like that, don't we? I mean, that's kind of what
Woohoo! Yep, absolutely. In fact, from now on, the only reason I don't do this is because I have to type, but maybe, so boxing gloves are out, but maybe like MMA gloves because your fingers are exposed. Mm-hmm. We could wear those while we just,
I had to get a pair of those the other day. I can't stand boxing gloves. And I wanted to box. Yeah. I have a punching bag in my house
that
bag?
I
use.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have punching gloves. And I thought why would anyone use these if you can get MMA gloves? Those are so much better. Anyway, sorry guys. Welcome to the MMA podcast with the pastors.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about.
The guest next week is going to be Joe Rogan. So we're going to use a lot of those little buttons in the editing process.
Hey guys, have you ever tried DMT before? We do not support the DMT. Sorry.
Right.
Anyway, today's topic, that's probably what is going to be what we need to talk about, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So this came from a post I made a long time ago. It was the meme essentially was making distinguishing. It was it's not a very well used meme template, to be honest with you, but it's when Shrek is in his human form in a jail chained up with Pinocchio, and he tells Pinocchio to tell a lie so the Pinocchio's nose will grow. That's just so you kind of have the context if you need it. And the idea was that Pinocchio in the meme needed to tell a lie. So he says, tell a lie. And Pinocchio goes, we're all children of God. And his nose grew. And the point was that was a lie. We're not all children of God in the sense that we are, God's children. And boy, did that light some fires that I did not intend to light. Because partly my issue, I did not make a clear distinction from the start that there is a difference between the Imago Dei, which is being made in the image of God, and being a child of God. So I can see where maybe some people got upset about that. Do you think that's an issue that people have, Rob, or no? Am I an idiot? Or, I mean, yeah, but.
No, we are both experts in everything that we talk about. And no, I think that it probably is an issue. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten any backlash from that because
that's true.
Biblically, of course, we're not all children of God. That doesn't even make sense if you understand the fullness of the gospel and what that means and how it comes about and all of that. But we certainly. So there are a couple of senses, right, with that God is a father, right? One of those is in the way, so like in the same way that Satan is the father of lies, right? Referred to as that. So God, in a certain sense, is the father of all, in the sense that he's the father of all creation, right? He's the creator of everything. So in that way, sure, you could say that God is father. But there is a major distinction between being made in the image of God and being an actual child of God. And me, as Paul refers to when he talks about us being able to say Abba, Father, right? Like in that sense, that's a totally different sense than the fact that he created you, so therefore he's the father of you, right? Mm-hmm. It's a it's a fatherly sense as we would typically think father, right? Like daddy, Abba, right? That's a totally different thing. I think it is an issue for sure.
Gotcha. So one of the things, and one of the comments that was made actually by somebody in the comment section, which was nice, was that they pointed to John 1:12, right? So I want to read a little bit before and a little bit after that, so you kind of get the idea of what this commenter was pointing to. But so John chapter 1, starting at verse 10, we'll back it up that far so we can have an idea. But it says, he was in the world, and through the world was, I'm sorry, hold on, I can't see this over my mic. He was in the world, and through the world was made through him. The world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or of a husband's will, but born of God. And I think the reason that commenter pointed that out was because of the idea here of exactly what it says, is that it wasn't anything that we did, rather it was what he did, and it was him giving us the ability to become children of God. Now again, contrastly, I mean, if you go back to the Imago Dei back in Genesis, I think those two ideas live okay together, because it's a matter of, he created us in his image, but we are sinful, we are far from him, we are not part of his family. And I think the biggest thing, and I'd like your feedback on this too, I think the idea of being children of God really comes from the concept of the New Age, outside of the Bible. This is, we are all one, part of the divine nature, that sort of thing. I think that's where a lot of the confusion is, because it's not taught on very much as far as that distinction. So the assumption is, well, yeah, he created everything, so we're all part of his big family.
Yeah, Genesis 1 verse 26 is what you're referring to. And then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and et cetera, right? And so there is this picture, speaking specifically of the image of God. There is this picture that every human in all of history and in all future, right, has been made in the image of God. That's how we are created. That's humanity in general. But how I'm gonna go on a pastor journey here just for a second. The gospel is the answer to the question. I mean, because here's a picture of what we're talking about when we make a distinction between image of God and child of God. Everybody has been made in the image of God, right? That's not a secret. It's not, they don't even try to hide it. It's not a mystery. It's right there, black and white, easy to see. We were created to live in a certain way, right? We were created to worship God, to know God, to have relationship with God. And image of God has a meaning, right? It's not just something that exists or some title. We're made to, like, what is an image, right? It's a picture of something. It's a representation. Yeah. So the whole idea that we're images of God is that we have a calling to be pictures of who God is. We have a calling to show the rest of creation, to show the rest of the world who God is, what God is like, the character of God, all of that, etc. Right? And the image bearer of God that is not a child of God is simply someone who was created in the image of God, creating to image God, that is not doing that because of sin. That's the difference. And it's own, like, I have written down that children of God happen when crappy image bearers begin to actually bear his image, because God in his infinite grace and mercy raises them to new life in Christ, who was, is, and will be the perfect image bearer. So that's where I'm at on that.
Well, I don't think there's a whole lot to be more said, honestly, on the subject as far as the distinction. I think the idea is that we need to, as Christians, be able to obviously make the distinction, but be a whole lot more communicative in the sense that we're actually talking about it, right? Now, the perfect thing that I think gives us that opportunity to do that is in how first off we treat people, because we treat people well because we've been treated well, but also because they are also made in the image of God, and how
Yeah.
that lives it out. And then that can open up that conversation of the difference, because I mean, obviously we live in a world that gives us multiple opportunities a day to either treat someone like they are made in the image of God, or to be sinful and not do that, which will then open up the conversation a little bit more to the difference of that, of why. So for example, I mean, just to give a practical example, if I'm at work and I'm treating someone like God treats me, which is giving them grace, mercy, love, kindness, pursuing them when other people don't, the question, just by the way I'm living, and the way I'm talking to them, will inevitably bring up the question of why I'm doing that. And then the distinction can honestly, like you said, it's a gospel issue, be discussed out, can be talked out, in the distinction of, well, I'm a child of God, and this is why I act the way I do. This is the reason I do the things I do. Because I think some of the reason, maybe, I mean, this is just a thought that came to my mind, so I could be totally wrong, because sometimes, my thoughts are not perfect, believe it or not. But the idea is that I think sometimes we as Christians don't really even think about how we're treating people, and if we're treating them the way that, as if they are image bearers of Christ, right? So if you're super mad in line at a store because now you're in a mile long line and you're in a mask and everyone's mad and nobody's got anything you need, it's going to be harder for you to get in the right headspace to remember that, hey, everyone in this building is made in the image of God, and I need to treat them as such, right? So I think the first barrier for us all as Christians is just to remember that. And then the distinction will naturally bear itself out. But we're so stuck on base one that we can't get to base two sometimes. So,
Yeah, I think I mean, all you have to do is look at the news for 5 minutes, right? I mean, even the whole idea of like the racial stuff that goes on, right? Like that's a big news thing right now. And the whole thing behind that, and it doesn't matter if you're the person who is actively about to throw a brick through a window and you're claiming, this is a racial thing, white people are terrible, black people deserve better, whatever. Or if you're on the other side that is, like, calm down, that's just as racist, right? No matter what your thoughts are on that, the whole problem is not actually a race problem. It's an image of God problem.
mm-hmm.
The whole problem is that one person or group, that's another whole thing. They identify with like tribalism more than anything, but one person thinks that the other person legitimately is not an image bearer of God, or they at the very least don't treat them like an image bearer of God. You don't think about it in those terms, you think about it in other group terms. But the idea that we're all made in God's image, that's how it all began, that's how it continues to play out. That goes back to the same idea that we're all one race, right?
Mm-hmm.
The human race. And so all of these issues that you see even in the news right now are because we neglect the idea that everyone is an image bearer of God, and that we're not, just magically the only ones that matter.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, so when, as the church, and I mean, that's who I think we would be speaking to specifically right now. As the church, we need to remember that first, and then we'll be able to communicate the difference between made in the image of God versus a child of God. Because, I mean, what we see in Scripture specifically, I mean, obviously using John 1:12 as a jumping off point, but we're brought into the family of God by the work that Jesus did, and then the changing sanctification work in us. So we not theoretically, we should be living in a different way and demonstrating that out. And like you said before, imaging that to the world, so that there is a difference between someone that's just made in the image of God versus somebody that is in the family of God. Because our family, I mean, if we're talking familiar terms, our family, the family of God, our family lives differently than all the other families. or we should
Supposed to.
practically, yeah, or we should
Yeah,
practice. We should actually. be doing that. Now, again, like all families, we're a bit dysfunctional. So, but we should be far less dysfunctional than the other families. So the idea here is just, I mean, in case you guys, this is going to be a shorter one, but just to sum it up for you, you can become a part of the family of God, right? By the work of Jesus Christ. But the idea is that you are not defaultly in the family of God. So when you die and stand before him, you can't be like, well, you made me, so I'm yours, daddy. It's a matter of, I can't believe I just called God daddy. But anyway, so it's, it's a matter of, you can't just claim that because you're not a part of it. That's like me going down to the street, knocking on the door, walking in and start eating somebody's food out of the fridge and be like, hey man, we're all human. This is my food too. Well, I'm not part of that family. I'm not welcomed into that house. I am an intruder, and they have every right to do whatever they want. Like, kick me out. But that's the concept there, is that I can't just claim something because, hey, you're human, I'm human, I can eat all your food in your house. Just because we are made in the image of God doesn't mean we're defaultly, that's not a perfect example, but you get my idea, defaultly in the family of God. So you have any last thoughts? Because you said you had some notes here, brother.
Well, so I want to ask, specifically, how are we, or they actually, I wonder how they're interpreting John 1:12 and 13, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. Because it sounds like, okay, it sounds like, but as many as receive him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. So he gave the right to become, right? So it sounds like this isn't something that is inclusive of every human being on the planet. Not all of them will become. They just have the right to, okay? Even to those who believe in his name, 13, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. It seems to me that this was the person who used that verse to combat the idea that everyone,
defending that it was. No, the person that used the verse was defending the fact that we are not all God's children.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I should have clarified that.
I think no, it's okay. I think that this is all throughout Scripture. The whole gospel hinges on the fact that if everyone's a child of God, right? If everyone's in the family, then what the heck are we doing? Like, who cares then? Then what you're practically saying then is the rapist, right, who just raped and murdered a woman last night, is a child of God. You know what I mean? Like, so what, would you share the gospel then? Would you share the gospel with anyone if they're already in? There would be no purpose in anything that we're doing, mm-hmm. other than just hanging out and living and doing what you want. Like the whole idea of the gospel is to bring someone, to alert them essentially that you were created in the image of God. You were created for this, but this is how you're acting because of the flesh and the sin in your life. So this is what God did to kind of remedy that. This is the mm-hmm. answer to the biggest problem you'll ever have, right? The biggest problem you will ever have is that you're an image bearer, but a crappy one that doesn't bear image, right? Which is a pretty bad place to be. So here's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Here's how you could become an actual child of God and bear his image correctly. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's two very separate things. And I think as a point to end with, for me anyway, I'm a pastor, right? So I have a job to preach just about every week. And one of the ways that we combat this kind of thinking is by being clear as we're preaching, right? Yeah. And teaching, for that matter, in classes or whatever you do, like this, or even in podcasts, whatever your thing is, right? That I talk about being image bearers all the time, right? Like that is my understanding of who we're supposed to be. And so a child of God is an image bearer of God, and a correct image bearer of God is a child of God. The problem comes from sin. It severs that, and like you're not you are an image of God. You're created in the image of God, but you're not functionally an image bearer of God.
Mhm.
And the gospel and Christ and what we gain through all of that simply raises you to that where you're functioning now as an image bearer of God and repenting when you're not acting as such.
Good deal. You know something? I think that sums it up. Anything I add to that little mini sermon there is just not going to help. So we are going to leave it at that. I think that clarifies to a point enough that if anybody did have a question about the difference, it should be cleared up because, as you said, we're experts. So, I mean, what else?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
What do you say? All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Mike Hill and
Rob.
I was hoping you were going to go with Roberto. We'll catch you next time on the
Roberto
podcast.
Right.